name is Edward Ebenezer Jeremiah Brown. I'm a football supporter of Ipswich Town. Wherever they play, you'll find me. I haven't missed a game since I was 3. With me scarf and me rattle and a big rosette, singing where was the goalie when the ball was in the net. Follow the town, up or down. I'm Edward Ebenezer Jeremiah Brown, but everybody call me Ted.
Hello and welcome to another edition of We Follow the Town, the second podcast in a day, because of course a new owner has come to Ipswich Town. And before we get on to today's show, I just need to mention our sponsor. Julian Hughes is a golf coach and he teaches at Old Joe's Golf. He is a member of the World Golf Teachers Federation, so whether you're just starting out on your golfing journey or you already know how to play, Julian can help you improve your game. So what are you waiting for? Book lessons through Old Joe's or directly through Julian Hughes at 07392 834 199. I'll repeat that again, 07392 283 4199. But let's get on to today's show because I'm joined by a very special guest from the Blue Monday podcast. It's Rich Woodward. And first of all, Rich, let's talk about the new takeover immediately. How are you feeling about the takeover? And it's come out of the blue, hasn't it?
Has it come out of the blue? It's kind of been in the kind of ether for a while. Is it on or is it off? Firstly, can I just say, I haven't heard Edward Ebenezer Brown in about a year and 1 month since I was in Portman Road for the Coventry match. So lovely to hear that. I love those opening titles. So thank you for reminding me of that classic. So yeah, I mean, it's the first time that I heard about it properly was kind of late Feb, and then we had Jim White on our show talking about his article that he'd done for the Telegraph, and he just chucked in there that, and as we understand it, there's a takeover and there's these certain folks involved, and then ever since that, it's kind of it's snowballed from there. But there was a sense a few weeks back, wasn't there, that it stagnated and all that kind of stuff, and you worry about is it posturing, is it negotiation? So to see it over the line, a little bit out of the blue this morning, is exciting. It's it's change. Change is scary, often good, hopefully, and plenty for the likes of you and I to talk about. So and obviously anyone else who's on the chat, and I see Jules is getting involved as well. Jules, I'm up for a lesson, by the way. I shall be in touch at some point. I hear you're a bit of a pro, so I need my backswing just needs all kinds of work. So I'll be in touch, Jules.
And so let's talk about the takeover in more detail, and we'll also talk about Marcus Evans. So if you have any thoughts about Marcus Evans's tenure at Ipswich Town, let us know in the chat, because Marcus Evans, when he took over in 2007, there was very much a feeling of excitement surrounding it. Okay, so we have a takeover now, a new takeover, because Marcus Evans didn't particularly work out, as we all know. How do you compare this new takeover to the takeover a couple of years ago, or over 10 years ago, when Marcus Evans first took over? If that question makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, as I said just now, it change, isn't it? And as football fans, our natural inclination, except for periods of stability when it's the hope that kills you, it's the optimism that maybe kills you at this point. I was at Norwich City away when Marcus Evans took over, and there were people in both camps of is this someone we can trust? The idea of an owner who's not kind of known to the club was scary to some people, and some doubts at that time have proven to be the case in the prevailing 13 years. So some people say I was right about Marcus Evans, and that may or may not be true. But change is always uncertain. The positive thing, which I guess we didn't really get from Marcus Evans, we didn't see Marcus Evans until 10 years almost after his takeover. Today we've seen Mike O'Leary, who's the chairman effectively of this Game Changer 20 Limited. We've seen Brett Johnson. We've heard tweets from the rest of the guys in that ownership group. And I think that's the difference. And they're talking in positive, tangible terms that we can all understand as well.
So after 11 years of Marcus Evans' ownership, the club finished bottom of the Championship in 2019. What do you reckon his legacy is at the football club? Because I'm 21 years old. I've known nothing apart from Marcus Evans' ownership. I haven't seen much success at all. So, I mean, surely he hasn't got much of a legacy at all.
I think you're right. And I can only sympathise, Ben, for your 21 years of following Ipswich Town. It must be an absolute burden, apart from maybe the 14-15 season. And even then, I was talking to Graham Mack about this on Radio Suffolk, that 14-15, Marcus Evans' legacy for me, apart from penny pinching and stripping back costs to kind of the bare essentials and leaving the club in a really difficult state, is keeping us afloat. And then there is just us surviving, which financially, it's not how you build a football club. But his legacy is that 14-15 season where we were top of the league at Christmas pretty much, or there or thereabouts. January window opens and could have brought in, some really progressive signings, spent a bit of money, brought in some strikers that we needed, and we got freebies, loans, and I think we bought in Freddie Sears, didn't we, for a small fee? That was the moment. That was the sliding doors moment for Marcus Evans' tenure, and everything else is about his custodianship of the finances. To Sam's point there, no one's going to criticise Marcus Evans for complying with financial fair play, and I think both he and Ian Milne and Simon Clegg were hoping that financial fair play would bite at some point and there would be some penalties and points deductions, and that never really happened. And when the game moved on, Marcus Evans just looked like he was out of his depth, and we counted the pennies and it slowly spiraled us down, isn't it? So that's the legacy. I mean, in all of us hope and pray his legacy is this takeover. He's 14 months is taken to do it, apparently. So it's clearly he's the due diligence has been done. So maybe that's his legacy is he's kept us on an even keel financially. On the field, we've kind of stagnated a little bit, but this takeover maybe takes us into another league, literally. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
So would you say that Marcus Evans' biggest mistake was not building a decent relationship with Ipswich fans? Because over the last couple of years, there has been a real discontent between Evans and the ownership. We saw the Blue Action staging several demonstrations against both Evans and the manager, Paul Lambert. So would you say that, the new owners, would you say that their main priority should be to build that relationship back up again between themselves and the Ipswich community? Yeah,
I think so. And I think, the idea that Marcus Evans came in and wanted to be a silent or an invisible owner, I don't think in 2007, 2008, whenever it was, I don't think that's possible. You don't own a football club and then are anonymous. Or if you want to do that, you get someone who's better than Simon Clegg or Ian Milne to be the face of the club. The guys who have taken over today, we've heard from them. We've heard from two of them at least, and tweets from others. And I think fans are naturally suspicious of people who who aren't accountable to the supporters. So it's a really easy, quick win for me, for the new ownership to be present, to be accountable, to be visible, and that builds the trust with the supporters. So I think you're spot on, Ben, that if you are hidden away and think just by turning over the finances you've done enough as an owner, I don't think that works for me. You need to have a governance structure, an infrastructure, and you need to have a plan, a credible plan, and you need to be accountable for it, particularly when that plan doesn't go right. And Evans, it was a back of a fag packet type plan, the 5-point plan, the 10-point plan. It just never worked out. And particularly when the results are bad, you want someone to face up to it. And he put Lee O'Neill in front of us. And Lee O'Neill, to be fair to him, was given a really tough job to do that. And I feel sorry for him. I'm a bit disappointed that he wasn't a bit more honest when he was put in front of the cameras. But hopefully that's coming with the new CEO, who's yet to be appointed, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk about the club infrastructure, and please get involved in the chat because later on we will, of course, be talking about the new owners. We're not just going to be talking about Marcus Evans. But Marcus Evans, he had people who didn't understand football around him. So he didn't have anybody who previously had jobs in football. He didn't have anybody who had previously had experiences as maybe a director of football. So would you say that it was a mistake not to surround himself with football people? Because he almost surrounded himself more with businessmen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't argue with any of that, Ben. We were crying out for it, and particularly given some of the managerial appointments that he made. Roy Keane to come into a whole new ownership structure, an owner who didn't know anything, Simon Clegg who didn't really know much about football either. I mean, that alarm bell should have been ringing pretty early doors on that one. And the biggest criticism I think with the lack of infrastructure, is there's no continuity. And one of the biggest criticisms I'd level at Evans' tenure is every single manager was slightly different to the last. There was no consistent thread. There was no one overseeing that recruitment of the manager. And you had Roy Keane chucked everything up in the air, spent loads of money, and Paul Jewell had to come in and did exactly the same. Chucked everything up in the air, brought in loads of new players on big wages, big transfers, loans, all sorts. Then Mick had to clear up the mess. Then Hurst did his own thing and was allowed to do his thing. No standard thread. Paul Lambert screwed things up as well. And that to me, if you don't build that infrastructure, if you don't have that governance, that happens. And that was ultimately more costly for Marcus Evans. And if he just got that right day one, then we might be in a totally different situation here. He might have got that return on his investment, but we'll never know.
So thank you to those who are getting involved. David Gort, as a basic owner, ME was fine, but he didn't seem to know how to run a football club. I think he's spot on by saying that. And Ryan Caterwright, ME seemed to be a decent guy, but was clueless on how to run a football club. So would you blame Marcus Evans for the poor managerial appointments that he made? Because on paper, Paul Lambert might have seemed to be a decent appointment, but if you looked back at his previous jobs, he hadn't really earned anything. Paul Hurst was a punt, if anything, because, we wanted a young manager. He gave us a young manager. That didn't work out. So would you say that he should get most of the criticism for the poor appointments?
We need to give him praise for appointing Mick McCarthy. That was a really important appointment at the time, particularly given relegation was a possibility there. In the end, he just deferred. He delayed it for a few years, but Mick McCarthy performed some miracles in his first season. And Paul Cook, another legacy point to your earlier question. The legacy could be getting the right man in finally, and then he's a minority shareholder. And can't realise the benefit of Paul Cook's experience. But yeah, as I said, the kind of conveyor belt of managerial appointments without a consistent, you say on paper these are good appointments. Roy Keane had a promotion with Sunderland under his belt, big name in the game, marquee appointment. You can kind of understand that. Then to go to Paul Jewell, a totally different character completely. I'd argue of all of the appointments, Paul Jewell was the most questionable of all of them, given his really poor run with Derby and Sheffield Wednesday. But even from Paul Jewell to Mick McCarthy, again, totally different managers. And it just felt like Evans was just chucking darts at a dartboard with managerial pictures around it, rather than I want someone who has these kind of 5 key characteristics. That will be how I base my appointments. It was just random. Who's available? Latterly, who's available on a free? Oh, Paul Lambert's available on a free. We'll go and get him. I think that's going back to your legacy point. I think that's that inconsistency, that lack of structure. I think that held us back massively.
So Luke Penning, and we're going to get into this in a minute, £100 million in debt under Marcus Evans. The vast majority of that has been written off by Evans, with 21 million repaid by Game Changer. A debt of around 400 million remains with the, or is that 400,000? I don't know.
Yeah.
With the club otherwise debt free. So is that a positive? Because that basically means that the new investors haven't actually had to pay Marcus Evans anything. In return, he wipes off the debt and gets 5% of the club. So would you say that the fact that he has 5% of stake in the club, he believes that the new owners could perhaps get us into the Premier League in maybe 5-6 years?
Yeah, you'd be stupid not to kind of keep around, to stick around, particularly if you're going to do something like Lucas and the EADT have reported there in terms of wiping out the debt. He's had between 30 to 40 million quid back, 30 to 40 million pounds worth of equity given to him as well. So, cash, I think, as part of the transaction. So it's not as if he's getting nothing for it. But yeah, if I were him, he's a businessman at the end of the day. If you hold your hand up and go, I've been a rubbish owner, let someone else have a go at it, and they suddenly figure it out, then you'd be stupid not to want a little bit of a skin in the game on that. He's been at Wigan, he was at Rochdale on Monday. His press statement and those of Game Changer Limited suggest that he's now a fan. So I can kind of understand that, really. But another legacy point to Luke's point there is the debt, writing off that debt, and accumulated under him. A lot of people earlier in the comments were saying, Marcus Evans kept us on a financial even keel. That debt accumulated every year, 5 to 6 million quid every year gets added on top of that debt. So, whilst he was quite happy to be a benefactor and a silent owner, that was okay. In theory, that debt is increasing and increasing, and to the point where he has to write it off, because there's not a chance in hell that anyone's going to give him 80 million quid for Ipswich Town Football Club in League One. So it's kind of a mixed story, that debt thing. But good on him for making it happen. He doesn't need to sell, as I think Mike O'Leary said. He didn't need to sell. So, I think that's a good situation for all concerned, really.
So, Dave Gort, on paper, the appointments he made were fine, but questions have to be asked as to why each of those managers failed. As pointed out, poor setup behind the scenes meant they were set to fail. So this is the final bit we're going to talk about Marcus Evans, because we're going to get onto the new ownership in a minute. But could Marcus Evans have done more to support all of these managers? Because, okay, the only bit of money he really invested into the squad was under Roy Keane. Okay, he could have maybe backed Nick McCarthy during the playoff season, but that didn't happen. So, yeah, should he have maybe given these managers more support?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? The flip side of Dave's point, and I can see where he's coming from, is Marcus Evans didn't interfere with the manager. The budget was the budget. It wasn't great in the Championship, but it is what it is. And could he have given him the managers more back? And I'd like to know what we said that he was never going to give a manager a 5, apart from Roy Keane, and to a lesser extent Paul Jewell. I just remember Paul Jewell spending $1.5 million or $2 million on Paul Taylor. Man, what we would give for some of that money. Then what else, I guess, could Marcus Evans have done? He appointed a manager to be the figurehead of the club. Arguably, he made the wrong appointments until Mick, who was able to do all of that and then performed miracles on that budget. I honestly think Marcus Evans tried to do the right things by his managers by not getting involved. And to an extent, I think Paul Jewell let him down. Paul Hurst was just given too much free rein to destroy the squad and bring in lower league players who just couldn't cut it at the Championship. Paul Lambert was kind of given a good amount of backing in the January window before we went down. We signed James Norwood. There was a queue of clubs going after Norwood, and we were front of that queue. So I don't know. I think there's a portion of blame I would attribute to the managers, less so Marcus Evans. But I get the poor setup behind the scenes. Injuries record has been really lousy under Marcus Evans. The academy, the pipeline of players is there, but is it a good enough level for players to be in the first team? We've seen Flynn Downs come in, Miles Kenlock in and out of the team this season. Dobra's had a chance, and Mazzuni's kind of buzzing around, but there really isn't, Wolfen in there as well. But they're not ripping the league up, are they? And there's not clubs queuing up to sign these players either, which is generally a sign that they're of a good caliber. So maybe that's what Dave is meaning about behind the scenes.
Should Marcus Evans have invested more into the physio department, sports science department? Because surely that's something that can maybe be brought up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, and to Paul Hurst's credit, I think Paul Hurst diagnosed some pretty fundamental issues with the club and tried to fix them all straight away, and was always going to fail. That level of change and churn was always going to create uncertainty. But I think Paul Hurst figured it out. Lambert bitched and moaned about it on Talk Sport, didn't do anything about himself. So I think that's fair. I think sports science is something, having a sports science head in Scotland on a Zoom call, that just doesn't work. And Paul Cook is now seeing it too. He's talked about fitness, the training sessions from a couple of weeks ago where the players couldn't hack the double session. I think that's something that needs to be fixed pretty urgently as well. Yeah.
So let's read out a few of the comments. Ryan Caterite, ME allowed managers too much control. Needed someone between ME and the managers. Think he's spot on by saying that. Luke Penning watched a bit of the interview with Kieran Maguire on ITV's website. Seems that we're going down a similar recruitment stream to Brentford and Barnsley. Exciting times. So let's talk about the new owners a minute, because okay, I'm actually gonna read the statement that was released on Twitter. In a statement on the club site, Evans outlined the details of the deal. I have always said that whilst not actively looking to sell, I would seriously consider an offer made to me by a credible party if it would invest in Ipswich Town in a way that provides secure long-term funding to help the club forwards. For an offer to succeed, the following boxes had to be ticked. And then he basically goes on to say that security for the club's employees, fair treatment of the shareholders, and he also mentioned that he's going to get 5% of the club. So do you reckon that when negotiating the deal with the new owners, do you reckon that Evans actually had the club's best interest at heart? Because we just mentioned right then that he wanted security for the club's employees. Surely these are positive things that we almost have to credit ME with.
Yeah, I guess so. But let's be honest, he's a businessman at the end of the day. He's sunk millions of pounds of his own money into the club. He wants to get some of that back. So, the idea that he's, it's good that he said those things. And I mean, is there really a likelihood of new ownership coming in and sacking every single member of staff? I suspect probably not. But it's a fair enough criteria, right, for it to justify an investment. But yeah, don't underestimate that Marcus Evans is in it to get some money back for himself as well.
So what do you reckon Lee O'Neill... I'm going to start that again. What do you reckon will happen to Lee O'Neill? Do you reckon he'll stay at the club, or do you reckon he'll leave alongside Marcus Evans?
I don't know. It's a good question, that one. I certainly expect that he won't be doing the same job that he has now. And I think he might be quite relieved about that one. As I said before, I think Marcus Evans put him in some really unfortunate and difficult situations where he had to face up to the media, and I'm not going to pretend that I thought he was particularly good at that. I certainly recall the press conference, the interview at Lincoln City away when we gave Paul Lambert the ridiculous 4-year contract extension, and he just wasn't credible in setting out the arguments for why that was sensible. I've talked about him, coming out and saying, "Oh, Lambert's not going to go anywhere. Oh, Lambert's out, and takeover's not happening. It's not. And then a few weeks later, takeover's happened. I think Lee O'Neill's probably good at what he does, which is involved in the academy operations. I suspect he might end up back there, but Marcus Evans isn't going, and he's being removed from day-to-day operations, but he's still a minority shareholder. For us to kind of tag Lee O'Neill's with Marcus Evans' failings, I think would be harsh on him. But I would like to think that everyone is going to have to justify what they offer to the club, and if they're not, if they're not contributing anything, or if there are better caliber people that can do those jobs, then it would be silly not to think about whether you make a change there. I hope. I'm sure Lee O'Neill's a lovely guy, but I just want him to do a job that he's equipped and qualified to do, rather than general dog's body and face for Marcus Evans.
So Ryan Caterite more or less says what you just said. L.O.N. O'Neill should go back to the job he was employed to do, which was manager of the academy. And I reckon he's spot on by saying that. Julian Hughes. Hi, Julian. He says a new CEO, a new chairman, and a new manager with a direction of what he wants from the first team right through to under 18s level. I think we've been crying out for this for the last 10 years. And let's read a bit more of the statement, because it is also worth mentioning this. Marcus Evans goes on to say in this statement, these three individuals will, alongside the new chairman, Mike O'Leary, formerly CEO at West Brom, will oversee and manage the business. I will also keep a keen, watchful eye on the club and will invest in the new company, owning 5% of it. So do you reckon that Marcus Evans will at least have a tiny bit of, I don't know, like a tiny bit of a role to play in the new ownership? Because if he said that, then surely he's going to maybe give them tips on how to run the club, like give them ideas, if that makes sense.
I'd hope that he doesn't. I mean, it smooths the transition period a little bit from a business perspective. But let's be clear, Marcus Evans' ideas haven't worked for 13 years. If I'm Mike O'Leary and whoever the new chief exec is, I'd be listening to what Marcus has to say, but I wouldn't be basing any of my decisions on that. So Marcus Evans is a flavour of the conversation and might have some valid contributions to make. I would suggest I would listen to them, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on them or base my decisions on them, because the evidence tells you that his decision making has been pretty flawed in his 13 years at Ipswich Town.
And in pure irony almost, Game Change released a statement saying, we want our first remarks on completion of this takeover to be the words of thanks to Marcus Evans. We have been discussing this sale with him for more than a year, which is a long time, a lot longer than I thought. And throughout the negotiations, his love for the club has shone through. He is a true supporter, and all of us at Game Changer 20 are extremely grateful that he has chosen to put his trust in us. And this is the ironic part. Marcus has invested considerable money, time and energy into Ipswich Town. Now, you'd almost think that the new owners have never actually seen Ipswich Town before, because Marcus Evans hasn't really put that much energy into the club, has he?
No, I think that, I think he's had to over the last few years. Before that, I'm not sure, and I think he was writing checks, and the energy that he has put in, as I said, I think has been largely misdirected. It's probably been well intended, but from what we hear from behind the scenes, Marcus Evans is micromanaging everything. So that energy, as I said, misdirected, possibly been stifling any kind of impetus or energy that the club staff have. So, time and effort, I think that's increased. But that's the minimum that I would expect from an owner, particularly an owner who doesn't want to employ someone to run the club for him. He's by default, he has to put in time and energy. So minimum for me. And does he put in more and time and energy into Ipswich Town than any supporter does? Driving up and down the motorways of this country, buying season tickets, buying football shirts, buying season tickets during a global pandemic. I know Marcus Evans is sticking £4 or £5 million into the club every year, but it's all relative, isn't it? And I think, yeah. Anyway, I was going to go on a run.
Go ahead, go on a run, because
it's a difficult because it's a different mentality and a mindset, and as a supporter. But any of us who had Marcus Evans's money, I think I'd want to be involved a lot more, and but I'd also know my limitations. My job has never really involved football. I've watched lots of football, and I know about, as a supporter, decisions that I would like, decisions I wouldn't like, but and therefore you own a club. Minimum is you put in time, effort, but you put in passion as well. And whether Marcus Evans has done that sufficiently, I guess I'd question that, particularly when I know, and I've seen, of Blackpool away or Fleetwood away, Accrington away. We've stood in those terraces, watched our club put in really terrible
Dire
performances.
yeah.
And I live in the Midlands. I've got half the distance back to Ipswich. I can't imagine supporters living in Southwest and in the Bristol
Or
supporters
Cornwall.
group. Cornwall, there you go, exactly
Yeah.
right. Time, energy, passion. That is the minimum for me. If you love the club, minimum. So I'm struggling to feel too good about Marcus Evans for that point, at least.
Yeah, and to be honest, I reckon you're spot on because, like before the pandemic, every month I'd travel out from Cornwall all the way to Ipswich. That's around an 8-hour journey. You have to put petrol money into consideration, so how much it takes to actually travel up to Ipswich. So, yeah, I totally understand what you just said. And in a way, the new owners, in my opinion, I'm just going to go on a small rant of myself. Apologies about this. The new owners is the best thing to ever happen to the club because a lot of the fans deserve new ownership. They deserve to see better days at the club because, in my opinion, the relationship between the community and the club was torn apart by Marcus Evans. And I reckon, seeing by the fact that Brett M. Johnson seems so passionate about Ipswich, I reckon he could build it up again. But, okay, I'm going to stop going on around here because let's talk about what Mike O'Leary said. He he told our fellow Ipswich Town has fantastic heritage. It's a fabulous club, and I can remember from my early youth the success that they had. They had two of the greatest managers football has ever seen, Sir Alf Ramsey and Sir Bobby Robson. And it's crazy that a club of this size is in League One. And then he goes on to say that the penultimate aim of the new owners would be to take Ipswich up to the Premier League. As a fan, how refreshing is it to hear that? Because Marcus Evans never really had plans to take Ipswich into the Premier League, whereas these owners have publicly come out, they've revealed their faces, and they've said, okay, we want this club to go to the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to Marcus, the Premier League was the target when he immediately took over. But the plans became more and more liquid and fluid and revisionist as time went on, to the point where, going back to Lee O'Neill, even Marcus Evans, no one would say target for this season is promotion from League One. Playoffs is the target. We'll see where we get to. Where's the ambition? Where's the setting of expectation in? We'll see where the season. We hope for success, and playoffs is kind of a target. Screw that. An organisation like a football club, and you go back to David Sheepshanks. Apologies, Ben, slightly before your time. But Sheepshanks had a 3-year plan to get Ipswich promoted to the Premier League in the mid-90s, and that plan brought everyone together. You knew, as an employee of Ipswich Town Football Club, you could ask yourself, is what I'm doing supporting the agenda of getting promoted to the Premier League? Because if it isn't, I should stop doing it. And with kind of the muddy, indirect ambition that was set by Evans and O'Neill, the level is what you get on the pitch. And we're 8th in League One, can't get a shot on target against Rochdale. That's where no ambition gets you. So I'm glad that the new owners have come out. I wouldn't have expected them to say anything different. To be fair, the end game has to be Premier League. You don't buy a football club for it to be mid-table championship. Let's be honest. But what I want to hear is the next point below. So, we've heard about Mike O'Leary was pretty decent about saying promotion to the championship. If it's not this season, which is looking less and less likely, then next season, great, happy with that. Once you've achieved that, then what? And what about the match day experience? He's talked about that, which is fantastic. What about the academy? What about the community? Give me credible, actionable objectives, and that's something that everyone can get behind.
So I'm going to read a few comments now. Dave Gort, he says, Ipswich ticket uptake might be interesting now. So do you reckon that there'll be a huge increase in season ticket uptakes?
Well, it'd be interesting to see what the prices are first and foremost. And as a current season ticket holder, I'd quite like to know how much money I'm getting back for having not watched a single minute of action at Pullman Road. So that's important. But yeah, I think Paul Cook, the announcement kind of came in, and I think that would have been a little bit of a bump. for season tickets, but this is a whole other level. If they price it right, I wouldn't be surprised if there were, I don't know, 15,000 season ticket holders, depending on what the package is. And this is a real early, this is setting a stall out kind of situation for the new ownership. If they get this right, that could be really good, and then that revenue is beneficial as well. So I'm captive audience already. So I'm looking to the folks in the chat. I'm looking to Dave if he's not a season ticket holder, or anyone else to answer that question. I'm going to renew. I was on the fence, and I've written to the club twice to say sack Lambert and please think about how you're running the club. And to be fair, that stuff has happened, which makes me a little bit more at ease at giving the club my money. But whether others are, I'd hope so. I would hope so. And wouldn't it be great if we're all allowed in the ground at some point in August or September?
Fingers crossed.
And yeah, knock on wood and all that stuff. There's 20,000 plus fans in the ground. Wouldn't that be brilliant? And we've missed the 12th man, I think, at Portman Road, and certain away matches. I was kind of thinking Monday against Rochdale. The really dour performance. I don't think an away support would have allowed that. I think the players would have known that the supporters were expecting of more. So it would have been brilliant to have, a mostly full Portman Road for the first game back to the new owners, wouldn't it?
And please get involved in the comments. Send in your questions. We'll read them at the very end of the show. Bono ITFC says, boom. Brilliant timing. So stoked and so damn excited for the future. It's a beautiful day. I agree. Ryan Caterite says, season tickets is the new owner's first big test. Julian Hughes, I agree. 15,000 with the team doing well. We will succeed 20,000 each game. I agree. And Dave Gort, for the record, I am not. I won't be either. Work commitments won't allow it, I'm afraid. But let's talk about the other fans a minute. Because surely there are fans who are going to be or feel happier to actually invest money into Ipswich, because that money is not going to Marcus Evans anymore. It's going to new owners who seemingly already care about the club.
Yeah, or it's going to the ORG, this pension fund in America. No, I get where you're coming from. Yeah, I mean, there was a point. So I do this thing called Football Shirt Friday. Get involved. We just put your football shirt on if you're working for a member, or even if you're not. Bono gets involved in that as well. Getting to Bono, I was enjoying his U2 lyrics there. It's a beautiful day. Let it get away, Bono. But Football Shirt Friday, there was a point a few weeks back where no one wanted to put an Ipswich shirt from the kind of Adidas era because it had Marcus Evans' logo on it. And there will be people out there who would have bought a shirt, but because the Marcus Evans logo was on it, they couldn't do it. Even the Magical Vegas thing as well. So yeah, this is all impetus to hopefully drive engagement and revenue for the club, which is a virtuous circle. The more we as supporters spend, the better the budgets are to do the stuff that we like, the community stuff, the academy stuff. It is a virtuous circle, and I do think Marcus Evans misunderstood that. The Planet Blue retail thing, they're pretty good at what they do, but I think they misunderstood the motivation for fans to buy stuff. There's a sentimental thing about football fans. You release a Copa recreation shirt, supporters like that, but that's not going to get hundreds of thousands of pounds through the door. If you embrace this takeover a little bit, a new shirt, a new sponsor, I don't know whether we'll still carry the Carers Trust, but because you're part of the start of something, I think people will want a season ticket, or they'll want a match day ticket, or they'll want to get a shirt, because you kind of want to say, I was there at the start, particularly if the end goal is promotion at the end of next season and maybe something in the championship before too long. So I think it's just embrace it, just exploit it. If I was the club, I'd be doing. If they did a deal today, 50% off replica shirts.
Yeah,
brilliant. More of that, please.
So okay, here's an interesting comment, and I don't know how true it is, if that makes sense. So David said, interview tonight reported by Andy Warren. Cook was unaware of the takeover. And basically Kirk was unaware of the takeover. What do you make of that? Because again, take that comment with a pinch of salt, as it might not been what was reported. But it's quite bad that Cook wasn't made aware that new owners were coming into the club, isn't it?
Yeah, I know David, by the way. Evening to David. Say hello to Johnny and the guys at Geno's for me when you're next in there. I thought what I saw reported was the new owners and Marcus Evans were united on Paul Cook as the number one target. When Evans decided to make the change in Lambert, which was months overdue, let's be honest, I think he said, "This is my intention," and this is and O'Leary and the guys at Game Changer were quite happy to support it. From what I understand, the players first found out about the takeover when it was posted on social media by the club today. And I'm not too surprised by that. Let's be honest, if Paul Cook joined Ipswich Town and didn't know that a takeover was likely, then he's not that dumb. Let's be honest. Whether that's important or not, I don't think it matters ultimately. Paul Cook's just his job is to get things right on the pitch. And let's be honest, Marcus Evans or not, that objective doesn't change. It might become easier at some point in the future. And I do think this summer is going to be a lot easier than it might have been if Marcus Evans been in charge. But I don't think it matters much. And to be fair, O'Leary's been pretty clear that Cook is a positive choice, and there won't be a change there. I have seen Andy Warren report that.
So Julian Hughes, I think also we haven't been able to go for so long. A takeover, new players will put bums on seats. Okay, but a tiny bit off topic here. Can we be certain that they're actually going to put money into the transfer budget? Because when Marcus Evans first came in, we were incredibly optimistic, but ultimately he didn't put much into the club at all. So what is to say that the new owners are going to do the same?
I mean, the good thing for the new owners is in League One, I don't think you haven't got to spend much. This summer there will be a big turnaround in players in the entire football pyramid. There will be hundreds and hundreds of players out of contract. So all the new owners have to do for me is work with Paul Cook, figure out who the targets are, and get them through the door straight away. There is no reason to wait and to drag this out. And we're hearing rumours already. And if Luke is on, it would be good to hear about some of these players that we've been linked with. Lee Evans. I think that the guy from Scunthorpe. There's a guy who's been on trial from Wigan who's from a team in Europe somewhere as well. Just get the deals done. That's all the new ownership needs to do. When you're in the Championship, that's to your point when the transfer kitty is more important, because Evans wasn't able to compete, and look where we are as a result of that. So that's the real quiz for me, if you're going to quote The Office.
So we'll get on to other stuff in a minute, but Ryan Caterwright says here, the players didn't need to know about the takeover. A lot of them won't be here. So, okay, a few months ago on the podcast, I was discussing with Lee about who we should keep, who we should let go of. Do you reckon that the new owners and the new manager will already have an idea of who they want to keep on in the squad? Because surely they must be looking at people like Luke Chambers, maybe other people, and saying, okay, they might be an asset to the club, but it might also be worth, letting them go.
Yeah, I think Paul Cook's probably figured it out already. And if your evidence or if your audition for a contract is Rochdale away, Bristol Rovers at home, Gillingham away, all these fixtures under Cook, then no one's really come out with any credit at all. So if I'm an out of contract player, and this is the issue for the rest of the season, I'd be expecting to be going. And why would you keep any of them? Frankly, Luke Chambers is a good servant, and Kolskus similarly. I think both of them have a future in coaching, and are probably a good backup option. But I can also understand folks who are saying, well, they're the past and we kind of need to move on a little bit. But I, along with a lot of people, and it'd be interesting to get your views, Ben, I wouldn't be too upset to see any of the players out of contract leave this summer, as long as there's the guarantee that we'll get enough bodies in to replace them.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that, because a lot of the players that we currently have been here for years. A lot of them are the players that people criticised when Paul Hurst brought in, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of these players go, the wage budget to be freed a little bit. But in my opinion, and I don't know what other people think in the chat, but I'd keep Luke Chambers because we haven't got any other leaders in our squad. We haven't got anybody who really knows the club as much as Luke Chambers. It'll be maybe bringing another player who has good leadership. You know, he doesn't really know the club, if that makes sense. So Luke Chambers, even if he sits on the bench every week, even if he's just an influential member of the dressing room, he'd be an excellent face to keep around. But view from the U2 says here, is this the end for Leo Neal? We kind of touched upon this earlier, but okay, say that the new owners get a new manager for the academy. Can you see them maybe giving Leo Neal a new role, or do you reckon that would purely be the end of him?
I think that would be the end. Yeah, to me, he's academy manager, or that's it. But I don't know his CV. I don't know what else he's qualified to do. But yeah, I think you're probably right. If they don't fancy him to run the academy, and let's be honest, there are some really good people there already. Brian Klug's an option as well. I think he might struggle. Yeah. Which would be sad for him. And as I said, he seems a nice guy, but there's also that, sentimentalism in football doesn't really work, does it? Holds you back. So
yeah, and he's not a media guy either. So I don't think that is necessarily giving him a good rap from the Ipswich fans. So Ryan Cage, right, and thank you so much for all of these comments. Can see about 20 players leaving. We need about 6 or 8 starters coming in, particularly in the attacking area. So we're not really talking about transfers, but we can briefly talk about it. In your opinion, which position on the pitch should we maybe prioritise? Because I've said this in the past, I reckon we need better goalkeepers in the squad, though as Ryan said just there, we may need 6 or 8 new starters to come in, particularly in attacking areas.
I think Ryan's right. And to answer your question, I think we need players at every position. Fullback has been a continual struggle. I think the centre-backs are okay. Our defensive record this season is not too bad. And I quite like Toto, Enciala and Wilson. Well. I think that's a fair partnership with Wolfenden and Chambers around. Fullback, though, I think we've been crying out for better fullbacks for a long time. Central midfield, too many players of the same type. Too many of the kind of Bishop, Dizelle, even Nolan, who flatter to deceive. Oh, yeah. Do you remember Emma Hughes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wide players, I don't think there's enough quality or goals out wide. I think Guion Edwards had a good start to the season, but it's kind of fallen away. And up front, Norwood is the only player that I would be willing to see stick around next season. I think we need better players everywhere, Ben, to be honest. And to your point as well, I don't see why those 6 to 8 players coming in to start can't be leaders as well. That is something that we are really severely missing at the moment, is players who want to take responsibility to change the game for us. There's too many passengers in the Ipswich squad at the moment. So why not bring in better quality, and why not bring in players who want to step up and lead as well?
Can you see maybe Flynn Downs being the captain? Because he was captain for one game, if I'm right in saying that. Yeah,
I think that's a good shout. I wouldn't be surprised, this is me speculating though, that the new ownership would see transfer sales as pretty critical for revenue. And if there's interest in Downs, like there was last summer, this is a bit of a weird thing about our last couple of seasons under Evans, is that when offers came in for players, we kind of rejected those bids as if it was some kind of show of ambition to turn down millions of pounds for players. I don't think in League One you can afford to do that. If someone comes back and offers us 1.5 to 2 million for Downs, unless I know that he was worth more last summer. Any multi-million-pound bid I would be accepting for any one of our players, frankly. And for the lesser squad members who are not out of contract, £500,000 for them, I wouldn't think is too bad either. This idea that we shouldn't sell because it's a position of weakness, I totally disagree with that. So if money is there for Downs, I think they would probably take it. And to be fair to Downs, I think he deserves the opportunity. If not, then I agree with you. I think he's a pretty good bet for captain.
So let's get back onto the ownership a minute, and please send in your questions for at the end of the show, because the new owners have dealt with the PR side of things a lot better than Marcus Evans did. We've already seen Brett appear on TV. He appeared on ITV East Anglia earlier on. How much positivity and hope does it give to you as a fan to actually see the new owners speaking out so publicly? Because Marcus Evans, as we said earlier, he didn't show his face for the first 10 years. We already have new owners who are willing to talk directly to the fans and who are willing to interact with the fans.
Yeah, I think it's a refreshing change. I think I kind of feel sorry for him and his Twitter feeds, to be honest. But, whilst it's good and everyone's positive, that's great. There will be a point at some point where that might turn, and we just need to be respectful that, this guy is an owner of a football club. It's not the same job as running that football club, So I guess just be patient with the guys from Game Changer. But yeah, as we said earlier, I want to hear the people who are running the football club give a credible plan for the future. And Evans really never did that. So if we continue to get that level of honesty and transparency, that to me is a massive increase and an improvement on what we got under Evans, which was bluster and fancy words with very little, action on them. So
if you were the new owner, because Marcus Evans, of course, had the 12-point plan, which was, in my opinion, a bunch of BS. I don't want to swear. If you had a new 12-point plan, okay, we're going to say a 5-point plan so we don't take all nights. What would your 5-point plan be as the new owners?
Championship in a season and a half at the latest. Premier League in 5. I'd want a governance structure that lasts longer than the manager in place. I'd want, so where am I on 3 now, aren't I? What did I say? Yeah. Promotion to Championship in 1.5 seasons. Promotion to Premier League in 5. A coherent hierarchy and structure that outlasts the manager. 3. 4, the academy being front and centre to our recruitment, our long-term recruitment, or at least a revenue driver. And 5, a closer relationship with the local community, local businesses, and obviously part of that is improving the supporter experience on a match day.
So Ryan Caterite says, if Chambers wants to carry on playing, he needs to go. If not, keep him as a player liaison officer for the academy. He can even keep his own youth B&B. What do you think about that? Because, of course, he keeps a few of the youngsters in his annex, doesn't he?
Yeah, I the player liaison officer is a great shout for Chambers. The trouble is we've got one of those already. But I think as an ambassador for the club, I think Chambers is excellent. And Chambers, I think, is sensible enough to realise that his playing time is going to diminish the longer he goes on. And I would, for him, kind of similar to Marcus Evans keeping his 5% stake, I feel really sorry for Chambers if he doesn't see a promotion or some kind of success at Ipswich Town. I know that's not, it's contradicting my point about football and sentimental kind of, decision making, but I'd quite like to keep Chambers around. And he's been really good at that. There was an article in The Athletic from his time at Forest that he did similar as well. And that kind of character, that kind of behaviour in football doesn't grow on trees. So I think he's a sound guy, Chambers. I'd want to keep as many of those kind of people around as I could.
So Graham Brooke on Twitter says, I'm 100% behind and 100% confident in Brett and Johnson. And I know how desirable and committed he will be to backing the club. The aim is a return for pension fund. Reality is only likely if we make the Premier League. And then basically says that he's looking forward to the future. And we have a question in the chat from you too. Thank you for joining us. Are we now in a position where we need to sell? We kind of mentioned that a bit earlier on. Do you reckon that we need to start selling? Because there are players who obviously could have a future at Ipswich Town, but then, as we mentioned earlier, you have players like Downs, maybe Wolfenden and Dazelle. I don't know whether the ship has kind of sailed on Dazelle, maybe, who we can maybe get a bit of money from.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's Bono. I don't know whether he's picking up on my point from earlier. That was a theory. That was a conspiracy theory, if you want, that if bids come in for players that will sell. I think that's a business decision. That is a strategy that kind of makes sense to me. The academy justifies itself either by populating the first team with players, or that players attract bids of 7 figures or 7 figures, and it pays for itself. And at the moment, we don't seem to. We've had a few players stolen from by Premier League clubs before they've even made the first team. But I would argue that the academy, Evans underestimated the value to the academy and to the club of selling players. As supporters, we hate that. I get that. I remember selling Kieran Dyer, Darren Ambrose, Darren Bent in the early noughties, and that hurts. But there's a pyramid, there's a pecking order, and let's be honest, we're pretty low down that pecking order. So the idea that we can just choose to not accept transfer bids, to me, is pretty silly. So that's the kind of point I was making, is justifying the existence of an academy can also be by selling players. Sometimes you need to make those difficult decisions for the greater good. Selling Kieran Dyer bankrolled promotion the next season for George Burley's team. It bought us Jermaine Wright, John McGreal, and ultimately Marcus Stewart, Gary Croft, Martin Royce on loan. It's an end. It's a means to an end. I know it feels painful at the time, but I don't think a League One club can afford to turn down bids for players. And I was surprised that Marcus Evans did that, to be honest.
So, okay, just to clarify from Bono's message, he said, we don't need to sell. Let's keep our casuals.
I mean, it's a case-by-case thing, though. But if someone comes in and offers £2 million for any of our players, including Flynn Downs, and I know that most people won't want to hear that, and I wouldn't have said £2 million last summer. I think we were right to turn that bid down, which wasn't even 2 million, I think, from Palace. But a season on, in a global pandemic, with Downs having missed a lot of the seasons for injury,
lots of money.
Is that, yeah, exactly right. Suddenly that fee doesn't look so bad to me in the grand scheme of things. I get that some people disagree with that, and that's totally fine. But I just think a bit of perspective sometimes is needed. If someone offers Caden Jackson that bid from Birmingham, Bournemouth, Huddersfield, whoever it was, in the last 2 transfer windows, would any of us, seeing how his season has panned out, have rejected those bids? I don't think we would. So you never know how something is going to play out. Downs might be brilliant, might be, I don't know, the next Declan Rice or something like that. Brilliant. Stick a big sell-on clause in whatever deal you strike. But it might be that he ends up being a championship midfielder and a good one. But the idea that, if we lose him, we'll suddenly be a lot weaker. He's missed most of the season. And yes, we've missed some bite in midfield, but there is enough options out there to replace Flynn Downs. I don't want to pick just on Flynn Downs, but I think if I'm a new owner of a football club, I would see transfer revenue as a credible opportunity to bring money into the club, as well as season tickets and merchandise and all that.
So Ryan asks, have we got any crown jewels? And okay, so let's talk about the players like Andre Dazelle and Teddy Bishop. Do you reckon the ship has kind of sailed for them in regards to how much we can actually get for them? Because they've very much been players who have struggled in recent years, especially under managers who haven't particularly facilitated to the type of players they actually are. So do you reckon that there are a lot of players in our squad who we won't really be able to force out or budge out, easily?
Yeah, I think Ryan's got a fair point there. I think there are a few. I think probably we overvalue our academy players because they feel like they're our own. But I'd argue, if you're Peterborough, or if you are even if a mid-table championship team, who in the Ipswich squad are you looking at and thinking, I'll have them. They'll improve my squad. I can't imagine there'll be more than 2 or 3. I think a lot of teams would take a punt on Norwood.
Yep.
A lot of teams would go for Downs as well. Some would go for Wolfenden. And then after that, I Dizelle, I think, is a big gamble. I think I don't want to put... Yeah.
Because look what happened to McGoldrick. McGoldrick was very injury prone. He left, hasn't had a single injury, and it's done really well. So why couldn't it happen to KVY, where he moves and doesn't get injured?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. On Dizelle, it's not Dizelle's fault that he's in a midfield that's pretty lightweight, and there's a big expectation on him to do all the work. In a midfield that works, and Paul Cook is probably a good manager to help him with that. He could re-find his mojo, but at the moment that midfield just doesn't work. It's dysfunctional. I like Teddy Bishop. A lot of teams will probably be put off by his injury record, but he's kind of seemingly come through that. But I agree with Ryan. Maybe 4 or 5 players that Edwards is linked with Sunderland and Preston today. I wouldn't be surprised if that's agent talk. So yeah, and I don't want to put it down on the team because these aren't terrible players, but are they players that are going to command big fees? Not too many, I think.
So let's talk about the ground a minute, because the new ownership has taken over. Well, it's actually bought Playford Road. That's why the negotiations have allegedly taken so long. How huge is that, though, that they've actually bought Playford Road? I'm not sure who owned it beforehand. Maybe it was the council. But this means that potentially we could put a lot more investment into our youth players and our youth facilities.
So the training ground was owned by Marcus Evans. He bought it from the club. And there was a lot of brouhaha about that decision when it happened. I would guess probably 2010. I think that was, someone might correct me there. There was a lot of concern that Marcus Evans is buying it to asset strip. And obviously it's come out that there is some planning permission that is possible on that land for housing, which is quite lucrative. So I think Playford Road is an asset. It's land. Land is an asset. So it makes sense for that to be part of the deal. But so I don't think it changes anything necessarily. I think Portman Road is probably, there we go, from Ryan. I think if you're going to invest anywhere, Portman Road is really shabby and it's behind it. I've been where did I go? Accrington Stanley had a mobile big screen in the corner of their ground. We haven't even got one of those in the I think the fans they might have one or something like that. Portman Road hasn't had any proper money spent on it in 20 years. And I think the good thing about the Game Changer guys is they understand that a football stadium can be a focal point to the community. You go back to the 2018 World Cup. The fan zone was full of people watching the England games. That there could be so much more that you exploit on a non-match day at Portman Road, that a bit of investment will allow you to do that. You can't pay. You have to pay with cash. Can't pay with contactless. Stupid stuff like that. The food selection terrible, prices extortionate. The match day experience and the non-match day revenue streams are so limited, so poor. That is something that if I'm Brett M. Johnson or whoever, I'm Game Changer. I'm thinking, well, I'd want corporate events at Portman Road every day of the week. I'd want to give access to that to community groups for free or for a subsidized rate. I'd want, if during the off season, I'd want events on the practice pitch or in the fan zone. Get the community together. Use the stadium as a focal point to do that. To do that, you're going to have to spend some money.
So get those thoughts and questions coming in. Just quickly, Portman Road is currently owned by the council. I think that's a fact. I'm not sure. If it is owned by the council, I think it is. Would you make an effort, if you were Game Changer, to actually buy Portman Road? Because if they buy it, then maybe they could upgrade it some more. I think the only bit of technology there is in the stadium is the small LED scoreboard at the very side of the stadium. So if you were the Game Changer Limited, would you actually buy Portman Road and then maybe modernise it? If that's the right word to kind of use.
So the council owns the land on which the stadium is built, and I think there's a 99-year lease or something to that effect. So the stadiums and the stands, I think, are owned by the club, but clearly you can't do much without the land. So the question is, do Game Changer make a bid for the land? If I'm the council, I would probably reject that. I don't think there's a price you can offer that they would accept. And I think the area of land has special status that it can only be used. I think there's some classification of public interest that it has, which limits its use anyway. So I think probably it would be money better spent to find another location for a stadium. Down by the waterfront, where the B&Q used to be, where there's just car parks, is an option that's not too far away, and just near Cardinal Park. But honestly, I think Portman Road needs modernising. I don't think it needs bulldozing. I don't think you need more seats. I think the capacity is probably fine. It's just really dilapidated now, isn't it? So yeah, Ed Sheeran concert 2022. Yeah,
I'd love that.
Why not? Yeah, exactly right. Fabio Wardley fight on the pitch. These events, just total no-brainers to me. Given there's no big arena venue anywhere in East Anglia, so yeah, these kind of things, the Game Changer guys need to be thinking about.
So, why can't the new owners buy the stadium, do you think? Because, okay, maybe it might be actually cheaper because, you just mentioned that it might cost a lot of money for them to buy the stadium. It might be cheap, if that makes sense, actually, to build a new stadium, as you mentioned, on the waterfront. That could be an option. So, okay, I'm going to actually go back to my question. What do you reckon would be cheaper? To actually buy the stadium or to actually build a new one? And also, which would be more logical?
So I think they own the stands. I think that's part of the deal. They just don't own the land that the stands are built on. Someone will correct me if I've got that wrong. I would argue I wouldn't be changing anything stadium-wise. And Brett Johnson said as much. It was a question that was asked on Lucky, are you going to build a new stadium? Because Phoenix Rising have a new stadium, which is a bit of a tenuous link, to be honest. And he said no, and I agree with him. I honestly don't think the club needs to do that. I think there was a point in the Premier League era where it was kind of to get to the next level, you need a new stadium. I just don't think that's important. And would you rather us invest the money in the academy, in the community, in the infrastructure, the sports science, or building a stadium? I don't think it's a no-brainer decision for me. I'd want the investment where it would tangibly make a difference to elevate us in the football pyramid. The stadium thing might come later on, but for now, I don't think I'd consider either, to be honest. I don't think the CBA is one to cost-benefit analysis is one that I'd be thinking about. I would be thinking of making the existing stands better, though.
And finally, before we close up the show, in a couple of years' time, where do you see Ipswich Town? Because, I think a lot of us are going to be very optimistic in regards to where we do see Ipswich Town, because I'm actually hoping to see us back up in the Championship. Maybe the Premier League, but, the Championship is probably more realistic. So where do you see, Ipswich Town being in 5 years? And I invite everybody in the chat to answer the question as well.
Yeah, I'd be disappointed if we're not comfortably in the top 6 next season. As much as we kind of think there's a big summer for Paul Cook, he's the right man. New owners, that level of change and churn of players, that doesn't suddenly just click overnight. It might click through the season, but I would like to think we're a good bet for at least a playoff spot, maybe even a promotion spot. A lot of pundits like Paul Cook, so I think promotion next season is an achievable aim. And frankly, if we're not talking about it being the target, I'd be disappointed. The reality is we might need to lower our expectations a little bit, but momentum is a strong thing. Confidence is a strong thing. Paul Cook's a good coach, so you never know. I'd be disappointed in 5 years, and I know the new owners would be as well, if we're not knocking on the door of the Premier League. To recognise the people who do have concerns about the new ownership, if we are banging on that door to the Premier League for a few years and making no real signs of success, then it might be that there's new owners in 5 years' time as well.
So Ryan Caterham says top end of the championship in 5
Yeah.
years. Is that a good, I don't know what you call it, good ambition to have maybe? Because top end of the championship in 5 years, that would be excellent. I can kind of see us maybe being a bit like Brentford in the way that we produce good youngsters and maybe sell them on for profit.
Yeah, I think that would be good. And I think that's a fair, to the 3-year plan that David Sheepshanks had, he beat his timetable. If everything works, if there is a structure in place, a good manager, good off-field, good academy, staff, off-field staff, all pulling in the same direction, you often find that you exceed those targets sooner rather than later. So ultimately, in the short term, we are a mediocre team in the championship, or we're a pretty average team in League One, is what I meant. That doesn't correct itself quickly. With a few months of good transfer business, we might be on the right track, and then build from there. But I think Ryan's suggestion there, I think, is a fair one, and I think most Town fans would accept that. And let's be honest, we were struggling in the championship for quite a few years. We had the 14-15 season as a bit of an anomaly, but let's not underestimate how difficult that challenge to be, particularly in the world of parachute money and the likes of Norwich and others who are yo-yoing up and down. It's difficult to compete against that. So, yeah, I think that's a fair target, I'd say.
So finally, before we do wrap up, we play the MK Dons on Saturday. What do you reckon the score will be? And what are you hoping to see out of that game? It's because, fingers crossed, hopefully the players are reinvigorated by the new ownership.
MK Dons on good run of form at the moment. And I think probably if the season had started a little bit later for them, i.e. if you'd erased maybe the first few months of the season and started from, I don't know, December time, MK Dons would probably be in the top 6. So it's going to be a tough one on Saturday. I'm predicting a draw, hopefully a score draw, which suggests we've had a shot on target. But I think it will be tough. But then the games get a bit easier after that. Am I expecting a huge reaction from the players? Probably not, to be honest. But what would be good is to see maybe some different faces. Particularly if Paul Cook's decided that some of the players that he's been picking who have not been delivering enough for him. So that might be good.
So who would you start then? You mentioned about new faces. In my opinion, I'd actually give Tyree Simpson a go over Aaron Drynan on the bench. That's quite controversial, I'm not sure. So who would you maybe give an opportunity to play for Ipswich Town, even if it is off the bench?
I'd be starting Dobra, certainly. I'd be quite keen to see Brett McGavin. I don't know whether his loan prevents us from playing him. I don't think it does. I'd quite like to see Brett McGavin in midfield because I think Liam Gibbs maybe as well. Yeah, I mean Cornell in goal maybe. I don't know.
I always said that.
I mean, what at this point in the season? Let's be honest. Playoffs are unlikely. I'd quite like to see some just mix it up. I'd quite like to see Luke Matheson if he's fit at right back. That'd be nice. Ken Lockett left wing back or left back.
He didn't really do anything wrong, did he? Like, why was he dropped?
I think he might have picked up an injury, to be fair. I think he might have got injured. So yeah, just mix it up. And I don't think we've got anything to lose. No one, the expectation of playoffs is so diminished now that, what's the harm in mixing it up? What's your prediction, Ben? We want to hear from you. What's your team prediction or score prediction for Saturday?
So my score prediction will be, I'm going to be optimistic. It will win 2-1 because the MK Dons are in good form. I can see them scoring, maybe Cameron Jerome if he's fit, that is. And with the players, I'll just maybe give a few of the youngsters a go. I'd have a go for the 4-4-2 because, we have kind of tried playing it in the past, or we haven't actually fully tried out the 4-4-2. So yeah, I'd give that a go. If Norwood is fit, play Norwood with maybe Jackson up front. And at the back I'd play Ken Lock. I'd try and keep Stephen Ward at the team as I'm not a big fan of him. I reckon that injury has kind of ruined him, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I'd maybe give Cornell a go at the back. To be honest, Thomas Holy hasn't done too much wrong. He does have the odd ricket in him, but yeah, there's no harm in maybe giving Cornell a go. So yeah, those are my predictions and my team predictions maybe. So yeah, 4-4-2 and those players.
We shall see.
Exactly. And I just want to thank you all for joining in the chat. View from the YouTube. Really happy I caught this stream. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you very much. And just to quickly mention before we close today's show, Julian Hughes, golf coach. He is, of course, a golf instructor. And you can contact him if you want golf lessons at 07382 834 199. We want to thank him very much for sponsoring the show. You can find us on Twitter at We Follow the Town. Rich, where can they find you on Twitter?
You can find me at ipsrich, and you can find the Blue Monday podcast at Blue Monday ITFC.
And you can listen to the Blue Monday podcast each and every Monday. And you can find us, as I just said, on Twitter at We Follow the Town. And you can listen to this once it's been released on streaming services via Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon Radio. Thank you very much for joining in with today's show. And yeah, keep following the town.